Kids, feeling sleepy? I'm your host, Mr. Creepy. Don't fall into the wishing well. Listen to my stories from hell. Ghosts in the afterlife. The werewolf who chomped his wife. A headless dentist on an ATV. The chicken corpse haunting KFC. Ever seen a vampire on a plane? A zombie slurping brains? While you're in your bedroom smoking Indo, didn't you notice the ghoul at your window? Sit back and relax your bones. Get onto your laptops or your phones. The YouTube address FYI is Mr. Creepy's time to die.
Bad evening. I'm your host, Mrs. Creepy. Tonight's story is about two men whose ambitions to be rich dug them in a situation that left one of them in a matrimony of consequences no divorce could get him out of. Tilbert and Hayes were friends who spent most of their days drinking and thinking of schemes to put together enough money to do even more drinking. One day, Tilbert heard a rumor that a rich old lady had died a few weeks ago, was buried in the cemetery across town. Upon being told, Hayes asked why he should care.
"Because,"
Tilbert said with excitement in his voice,
"she was never married and had no family to give away her wealth to. Anything that didn't go to the state was most likely buried with her, like her jewelry."
Hayes's eyes lit up with delight. Thinking that was possibly their chance to strike gold, the two waited until nighttime to sneak into the cemetery. Once there, they had little trouble finding the old lady's grave.
"Here lies the old bat,"
Hayes mockingly stated as he stared down at the tombstone.
"Let's get to work,"
Tilbert said as he handed his friend one of the shovels. Without wasting any time, the two proceeded to dig. Ever so often, they quickly surveyed their surroundings, making sure nobody saw what they were doing. The fog, however, was making it a little too difficult to see anything. Before they knew it, the shovels hit something solid. With a little more shoveling, they eventually uncovered the top of the old lady's casket.
"Finally,"
Tilbert said, exhausted from all the digging. The two friends quickly grabbed a hold of the lid, and with one strong pull, they opened the casket. But after doing so, they were both taken aback by the jarring sight and smell. There, inside the casket, already decomposing, was the old lady. Strands of her long white hair covered some of her black gown. She laid still with her arms crossed, but for whatever reason, her eyes were wide open. For a split second, both Tilbert and Hayes thought she was alive, but after the initial shock, they soon came to the conclusion that she was dead as a doornail.
"My God, I almost had a heart attack,"
Tilbert claimed, grabbing at his chest. Their shock quickly turned into excitement when they both realized the rumors were true. Displayed all over the old lady's body were various types of expensive jewelry. There was so much, in fact, that it looked as if she had specifically requested to be buried with it. With haste, Tilbert and Hayes started to grab and take every single piece of jewelry they could see. But even though they were filled with joy with their newfound wealth, there was a feeling of uneasiness every time they would accidentally stare into the old lady's eyes. No matter. It didn't take too long before they had cleaned the casket of every piece of jewelry they could find, stuffing them all in their pockets. Hayes would happily even put some of the rings on his fingers. The two men were just about to exit the grave when Hayes spotted something written on the corpse's upper chest, where her necklaces had laid before. It looked as if it had been tattooed. Upon further inspection, Hayes noticed it was written in a language that he wasn't familiar with.
Visna Mia Nuber,
Hayes muttered, having no idea what it meant. Suddenly, from somewhere in the distance, both men heard the sound of a man singing an old traditional folk song.
Whoa, sing Matilda, yo come a whoa, sing Matilda with me. It's the groundskeeper,
Tilbert whispered to Hayes.
Let's get out of here.
Before the two men would leave, though, Hayes took one last look at the widow. For some reason, he felt a weird sense of dread. He didn't have much time to dwell on it for too long, however, because the singing came closer and closer.
Up jumped the jumbuck who ran into the belly bong. Up jumped the swagman who caught him with glee.
Just in the nick of time, the two men were able to run off and evade being spotted by the groundskeeper. Excited about their newfound wealth, the two men drank and celebrated the night away at an abandoned cabin somewhere deep in the woods. Tilbert and Hayes talked about their plans on how to sell the jewelry, and after every exchange of ideas, they roared with laughter and glee.
Yeah! Oh, man! Oh, this is gonna be great!
Soon the two men eventually passed out sitting at the table. A few hours later, however, Hayes's slumber was interrupted by the sound of something outside. The sound was vague at first, but the more he listened, the more it sounded like an old lady's voice. Concerned, Hayes tried to reach out across the table in an attempt to wake Tilbert, but even in the dark, Hayes noticed that his friend was nowhere to be found.
Tilbert, where the hell are you?
Hayes asked in a low tone, but the silence was soon interrupted with the sound of an old lady's voice outside. That time, however, it was a tad bit closer, and this time Hayes could actually make out what she was saying.
I need my prized possession,
the voice said. Hayes's eyes grew large with fright.
I need it. I need my prized possession.
The voice said again, but that time even closer. Frightened, Hayes tried to get up and run. Unfortunately for him, he found himself falling to the floor. He hadn't noticed it before, but his ankles had been tied together with rope.
I need my prized possession. My prized possession,
the voice said even louder, but that time it was right outside the cabin door. Hayes desperately tried to untie the rope from around his ankles, but before he could, the front door violently swung open, and to his horror, there, being illuminated by the moonlight, stood the corpse of the old lady.
I need my prized possession,
she bellowed towards a frightened Hayes. Completely drenched in pure terror, Not being able to make any sense of what he was seeing, Hayes screamed. In an attempt to get away, Hayes unfortunately found himself backed into a corner of the cabin. He was trapped. The corpse of the old lady slowly made her way toward Hayes, proclaiming once again,
I need my prized possession.
Please, don't hurt me.
Hayes cried out. It wasn't long before the old lady stood over the terrified man, eventually leaning in towards him. Hayes soon found himself staring right into the ghastly face of the rotting corpse.
I'll give you all your prized possessions back.
Hayes whimpered.
I haven't sold any of it yet.
To his dismay, the corpse began to laugh.
That wasn't what I meant by wanting my prized possession back.
The corpse remarked.
The prized possession I am talking about is you.
Hayes was horrified.
What do you mean?
See this?
The corpse asked while presenting the words tattooed on her upper chest.
You read it?
I don't understand.
Hayes replied, his voice trembling.
The words are Latin.
The corpse explained.
And it means, will you marry me?
Hayes's eyes widened with horror.
And the answer is yes.
The corpse replied.
I will marry you.
Hayes screamed as the corpse grabbed one of his wrists. Her cold and rotting claws carefully took off one of the many rings still on his finger. She then slid it onto one of her own fingers right after. All Hayes could do was watch the horrific display going on right before his eyes.
You see, I always knew my one and only would eventually come to me,
the old lady claimed. Without warning, the corpse quickly grabbed the rope around Hayes's ankles and proceeded to drag him out of the cabin. Hayes screamed as he tried to grab at anything to save himself, but it was no use. It seemed as if the corpse possessed some otherworldly strength. While being dragged, Hayes saw another grotesque sight. There, sitting against a tree, was Tilbert's body, jewelry stuffed deep down his mouth and throat. But before Hayes could even offer a cry of anguish for his dead friend, he found himself suddenly staring down a freshly dug grave.
Here is your new home, my love,
The corpse happily told him.
No, 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 no!
Hayes screamed as the corpse dragged him into the hole. Hayes tried to escape, but the widow foiled every last one of his attempts before eventually wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. He did his best to squirm free, but it was no use. He couldn't break her grasp. To his horror, all he could do was stare right into the corpse's dead eyes as they lay on their sides at the bottom of the grave.
Please, please, let me go.
Hayes pleaded and cried.
I may have been alone in life,
the old lady remarked.
but I won't be in death.
The corpse then proceeded to lean in for a kiss as Hayes screamed. His scream was soon muffled as their mouths pressed together. Dirt started to rain upon the newly married couple, slowly covering them. From atop the grave, shoveling dirt into the hole, stood the groundskeeper from the cemetery. The old lady had given him the gruesome task to dig the grave before eventually filling it again. But by the sound of it, he didn't seem to mind, as he was singing that old traditional folk song. His good mood may also have been due to the fact that all of his pockets seemed to be full of expensive jewelry.
And he sang as he watched, da-da-dee-dee-da-da-da, you'll come a sing Matilda with me.
Mr. Creepy here. Friends, we don't care what you thought of tonight's horror story. If you don't stab the like button and slash the subscribe bell, this will happen to you. No!